Linda turned to face her student and said the consortium spent 3,000 cycles debating whether to make contact with Earth, and half the council wanted to leave humans alone and quarantine the entire system because they worried that if humanity remembered what it once was and reclaimed old weapons and strategies, they might finish what the Void War started. And Kate said that was why humans were restricted from so many areas of the academy, and why there were only 3 of them enrolled. And Linda said yes, because the consortium was testing humanity and watching to see if they would remember, and if they would become what they once were. And Kate looked down at her tablet at the evidence she had put together, and asked what humans were. And Linda closed her eyes and said the species that fought longest and sacrificed most, and held the line when everyone else broke, and she opened her eyes to meet Kate's look, and said the species that scared everyone else so badly, that even 12,000 cycles later, with humans reduced to primitive conditions, the galaxy's first thought was to stay away and hope they never reached the stars again. And Kate stood silent for a long moment, then asked the question Linda had been dreading, which was what happened in the final battle that ended the war. And Linda walked back to her podium and pulled up a file marked with the highest security level, and she broke the locks knowing this would cost her career. And on the hologram appeared an image of a world burning with continents visible under clouds of fire and in orbit. A massive human warship covered with weapons locked in combat with a dozen enemy vessels. And Linda said, this was the Battle of Terra Prime, which was Earth, and Kate's face went pale, and Linda said the enemy coalition brought 2,000 warships to kill all humans, after already destroying Mars and Venus and all the outer colonies, and Earth was the last target. And Kate asked how many ships humanity had left, and Linda said 57 ships against an enemy force 40 times larger. And Kate asked how they survived, and Linda shut down the hologram and said that was the thing because, according to every tactical analysis, they should not have survived, and the records from that battle were broken because most observers did not live. But what they knew was that the human fleet did not retreat and did not surrender, and somehow impossibly they won. And Kate asked at what cost, and Linda whispered everything because human cities burned, an orbit filled with debris, and population dropped from 12 billion to less than 100 million scattered survivors, and the technology that made them a space-traveling race was lost. But they survived, and they alone of all species that saw their homeworld directly attacked managed to survive. And Kate sat down in a chair and asked what now, and Linda sat beside her and said now Kate had a choice because she could keep digging and uncover the full truth and risk reminding humanity of what it once was, or she could let the past stay buried. And Kate asked if the consortium would stop her if she kept investigating, and Linda said she did not know. But she knew this, which was that every species in the galaxy studied the Void War hoping to learn from it and prevent it from happening again. But humans actually lived it and survived it, and whether they remembered or not, that legacy lived in them. And Kate stood gathering her things, and at the doorway she stopped and said, Professor, you said 3 species survived the Void War, which were Valorians and Krell and one other, and you meant humans. And Linda said yes, and Kate asked what made humans different and why the Valorians and Krell got to rebuild normally while humanity had to be quarantined and watched. And Linda met her student's eyes and said, because they retreated and surrendered and accepted defeat and withdrew from the galaxy, but humanity did none of those things because humans won, and that was what terrified them. And Kate nodded slowly and left the lecture hall, and Linda stood alone in the empty room, wondering if she had just changed the course of galactic history, because now one human knew the truth, and if Kate Sullivan was anything like her ancestors, she would not stop until everyone else knew it too. And Kate spent the next 3 days in her room barely eating with her eyes on her tablet as she gathered everything she could find, and the consortium's public files were huge, containing millions of historical documents from hundreds of species. But now that she knew what to look for, the patterns appeared like stars forming shapes, and the Krell called humans the persistent ones, and the Valorian records mentioned the speakers of defiance, and the extinct Hravish had a word that meant the species that would not break, and all references carefully avoided details as if speaking too directly about humanity's role might summon something dangerous. And on the 4th morning, Kate's door rang and she opened it to find 2 other humans standing there. who were Alex Chen and Danny Miller, and they were the only other Earth students at the academy, and Alex, who was 20. 2 and the oldest human student studying alien biology pushed past Kate into the room saying they heard about her lecture hall discovery, and half the station was talking about it, and Danny followed more quietly, and he was 20 studying space, physics, and said they were calling Kate the girl who asked the wrong question, and Kate closed the door and said, "Or the right one." And Alex looked at Kate's tablet at the documents and images across multiple screens and asked how deep this went. And Kate said deep enough that she thought Professor Morrison ended her career by showing what she did, and said humans fought in the Void War, not as small participants, but as major players, and they survived. And Danny sat down studying the data, and his mind immediately started processing what it meant, and he said, if humans had faster than light travel 12,000 cycles ago, why were there no records because Earth's oldest civilizations only went back 7,000 cycles? So what happened to 5,000 years of history? And Kate said humans deleted it or buried it so deep it became myths, and every culture on Earth had flood stories and tales of fire from the sky, and legends of gods fighting in the heavens. And what if those were not myths but memories of the Void War changed by time and trauma? And Alex walked around the small room and said, this was crazy because Kate was saying, humanity chose to forget they were a space-traveling civilization. And Kate said, not chose but had to, and pulled up another document saying the consortium's own mind doctors noted that humans showed unusual levels of species-wide trauma markers in genetic memory, and humans were more aggressive and territorial and paranoid than most species, and they said it was because of Earth's harsh evolution. But what if it was not that at all? And Danny finished her thought saying, what if it was trauma from a war that nearly killed them all? And the 3 students sat quietly, absorbing what it meant, and Alex finally asked what they should do. And Kate looked at her 2 fellow humans and said they needed to find the whole truth, not the clean version the consortium taught, but what really happened and why humanity fought, and how they survived and why everyone was so afraid of them remembering. Professor Linda Morrison stood in front of 200 alien students in the big lecture hall of the Galactic Consortium Academy, and the room was huge with 3 floors filled with creatures from 40 different worlds, and each one looked more strange than the last, and the crystal beings called Valorians sat in the upper seats while the methane-breathing Krell stayed in their sealed pods along the wall, and Linda fixed her translator collar and turned on the holographic display, because today she would teach about the worst war in all known history, which was called the Void War. And she said the Void War started about 12,000 cycles ago, and it was so terrible that it changed the entire galaxy, and dozens of species died out completely, and hundreds of worlds became dead wastelands where nothing could live anymore. And a Valorian student whose light showed curiosity raised a crystal arm and asked what the death count was, and Linda's face became sad as she said that military deaths were about 40 billion, but civilian deaths reached 200 billion, and entire star systems were destroyed by antimatter weapons, and the Calresh Nebula, which they could see from the station, was not natural, but was actually 17 planets that were blown to dust in one battle, and she showed images of the war with thriving worlds turned to rocks and space stations, the size of moons torn apart, and the students became quiet as they understood how bad it was, and Linda said the important thing to know was that this war had no winners because every civilization that fought in it collapsed, and not one world survived intact, and the technology loss lasted 5,000 cycles in a period called the Dark Silence, when faster-than-light travel stopped existing and worlds that once touched the stars could not even reach their own moons anymore. And she showed a star map with the damaged areas marked in red, and said, the war ended not through peace or surrender, but through everyone destroying each other, and the survivors were scattered and reduced to primitive life. And it took thousands of years for any species to rediscover space travel, and Linda stopped at the podium to let the weight of history settle on the room and said this is why the consortium exists and why they study together and trade together and solve conflicts through talking, because they had seen what happens otherwise. And a young Krell in the back asked, through his pod speaker, if any species that fought in the Void War still existed today, and Linda smiled sadly and said only 3, which were the Valorians who they studied with, and the Krell whose ancestors barely survived on colony worlds, and one other species, and She closed the holographic display and said they would discuss what happened after in the next class, and told them to remember that the Void War taught the galaxy that total war only leads to total destruction, with no exceptions, and no survivors. Who did not pay a terrible price, and the students started gathering their things, and the usual after-class talking filled the hall, and Linda stood organizing her notes when she noticed one student was still sitting in the front row, and the student was a human girl, probably 19 years old, with dark hair and brown eyes, and her name was Kate Sullivan, and she was one of only 3 humans at the academy, and she stared at Linda with a look the professor could not understand, and Linda asked if she had a question, and Kate stood slowly with her tablet in her hands and said, "Professor Morrison, you said no. World survived that war," and Linda said that was correct, and Kate asked, "Then why does Earth still exist?" And the lecture hall, which was still half full of leaving students, went completely silent, and Linda felt her blood go cold and said she was sorry. And Kate walked to the podium with her tablet out, and on the screen was an archaeology report that was recently released, and she said she had been researching human history for a cultures project, and 3 weeks ago, the Consortium Archaeological Survey released findings from the Mars ruins, and the dating was exact because the Mars colony was destroyed 12,000 cycles ago, which matched the Void War timeline perfectly, and Linda's hands shook a bit as she took the tablet, because she had seen these reports and hoped none of her students would connect the dots, and Kate continued saying the ruins showed antimatter bombardment with the same weapons used in the Void War, and Earth's moon had the same damage on its far side, and the asteroid belt had debris with markers matching destroyed warships, and other students had stopped leaving and gathered near the exits to listen. And Linda said carefully that Kate was making a big leap in logic, and Kate asked if she really was, and pulled up another file saying the Valorian Chronicles mentioned fighting an enemy they called the Pale Demons, who refused to surrender even when their worlds burned, and the Krell records spoke of the 2-armed destroyers, who made weapons that violated every rule of civilized war, and there were 17 different species records that mentioned humanity by description even if they did not use the name. And Linda set down the tablet with her mind racing, because this was exactly what the Consortium Council feared when they finally let humanity join 60 cycles ago. And she said quietly that Kate was suggesting humans fought in the Void War. And Kate said she was not suggesting anything but showing evidence, and the question was why every textbook, including Linda's, claimed no world survived, when Earth was right there, and when humans were right here. And a Valorian student pushed forward with his light showing alarm and said that was impossible, because humans were new to space and only got faster than light travel 80 cycles ago, and Kate said that was what they admitted to, and pulled up one more file, and Linda's stomach dropped, because it was an image of cave paintings from Australia dated to 11,000 cycles ago, showing stars and ships and non-human beings falling from the sky. And Kate said humanity had faster than light traveled 12,000 cycles ago and fought in the Void War, and somehow, unlike everyone else, they survived it. And the lecture hall exploded with shocked talking as students from many species started arguing, with some defending Kate's theory and others calling it crazy, and Linda raised her hand for silence, and when she spoke, her voice carried authority but also something else like fear, or maybe respect. And she said class dismissed, and everyone except Kate should leave. And the students walked out slowly with their conversations loud, and Linda waited until the last one left, before turning on the hall's privacy screens and asked how much Kate knew, and Kate said only what she found in public records. But it was enough to ask questions, and wanted to know why the consortium hid this. And Linda walked to the window looking out at the stars beyond the station, and said because they were terrified of humans, and asked if Kate understood what she was suggesting, which was that humanity survived what could not be survived, and that while every other civilization fell into darkness, humans held on to their knowledge and culture and identity. And Kate said softly that humans did not just hold on, but forgot, and that was the scary part, because the Void War was so bad that humanity chose to forget and destroyed their own records and abandoned colonies, and went back to primitive conditions, not because they were defeated, but because they chose to step back from the edge. Danny realized that was why the historical records were so broken, because why every species had gaps in their data from that time, And the virus did not just destroy technology, but destroyed knowledge. And Grant nodded, saying it worked better than Kane could have imagined because within a few generations no one remembered the truth. And the Void War became a warning tale of mutual destruction, rather than a story of human victory, and humanity forgot it had ever reached the stars. And Kate said until now because the Valorians found the Defiance and they know the truth. And Grant corrected her saying some of them do, including the Consortium Council and a handful of historians. And now the 3 students. And the question was, what they did with this knowledge, and Alex stood up agitated saying they tell everyone because humans deserve to know their own history. And Grant challenged him asking if they really did, and told him to think about what he was suggesting, which was telling 7 billion humans that their ancestors won the greatest war in galactic history by using a weapon that destroyed hundreds of civilizations, and that they chose to forget because the guilt was too great, and that every species in the galaxy had been treating them carefully because they were terrified. Humans might remember and finish the job, and Kate insisted that people have a right to the truth, and Grant said, rights are luxuries they can afford when survival is not at stake, and walked to the window looking out at the station beyond, saying, Earth is one planet with barely 24 faster than light ships, and the Consortium has thousands of worlds and millions of vessels, and if humanity's role in ending the Void War becomes common knowledge, and if the fear turns to hatred, they could face extinction. And Alex demanded if they were supposed to just keep living the lie, and Grant said she was saying they needed to be smart. Because knowledge is power, but it is also responsibility. And the 3 of them now knew something that could change human history. And the question was not whether to reveal it, but how, and when, and to whom. And Kate felt the weight of Grant's words, because she started this search wanting answers, and wanting to understand why her species was treated differently, and now she had those answers, and they were more terrifying than she imagined. And she said Professor Morrison told her the Consortium has been testing humans and watching to see if they would remember, and what if this is part of the test, and what if they want to see what humans do with this knowledge. And Grant smiled a real smile this time, saying now Kate was thinking like a diplomat. And yes, there was a group within the Consortium that believed humanity deserved to know its past, and that they had proven themselves peaceful enough in the last 12,000 cycles to handle the truth. But there was another group that wanted the past buried forever. And Danny asked which group Grant supported, and she replied the one that keeps humanity safe because everything else was secondary. And a sound rang out, and Grant checked her display, and her face hardened, saying they had a problem because the Valorian Council requested an emergency session. And they knew Kate had been asking questions, and they wanted to discuss appropriate boundaries for human historical research. And Alex said that sounded like they were going to shut them down, and Grant said worse, because they were going to try to send them home, including all 3 of them, and possibly every human student at the academy. And she started typing fast, saying she could delay them, but they needed to decide if they push forward knowing it might cost them their place, or if they step back at least publicly. And Kate looked at Alex and Danny and saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. Because they had come this far and learned truths their species forgot for 12,000 cycles. And Kate said they push forward but carefully, because they do not broadcast this to everyone. And they research and document and build a case that no one can deny. And Grant asked, and then what? And Kate said, then they give humanity the choice they were denied 12,000 cycles ago, which was to know who they really are. And Grant nodded slowly, saying, all right, and then told them about the other ships, because the Defiance was not the only human vessel from that time that survived, and they found 3 others hidden in different parts of the galaxy, and one of them might still have a working computer. And she pulled up coordinates, saying it was in the Calresh Nebula, which was the same nebula that was supposed to be the remains of 17 destroyed planets, and humans put it there hidden in plain sight, because no one would think to search a war grave. And Danny asked if they could get there, and Grant said not easily, because the nebula was technically off limits and protected as a memorial site, but she might be able to arrange a research trip, and it would take time and permissions and a very good cover story. And she looked at the 3 students, saying it would also put them directly in the center of the most dangerous historical secret in the galaxy. And Kate thought of Professor Morrison's words that every species studies the Void War hoping to learn from it, but humans lived it. And she asked when they leave. And Grant's smile was sharp, saying, She would start making arrangements, but Kate needed to understand that once they board that ship and access its computers, there is no going back, because whatever they find will demand action, and asked if Kate was ready for that. And Kate thought of Earth and billions of humans living their lives unaware of their true legacy. And she thought of the fear in the consortium's treatment of her species with restrictions and watching, and she thought of Captain Andrew Kane making the impossible choice to end a war by destroying the galaxy's ability to wage it. And she said her ancestors made the hardest choice imaginable to save their species, and the least she could do was have the courage to learn why. And Grant nodded, saying then, "Welcome to the real fight. Not the one with weapons, but the one for truth, and it is slower and messier and infinitely more important." And as the three students left the diplomatic rooms, Kate felt the weight of history on her shoulders, but she also felt something else, which was purpose, because for 12,000 cycles humanity lived in ignorance of its greatest triumph and its darkest hour, and that time was ending, and the question was what would emerge once humanity remembered who they really were. In the research vessel Nova Light was a small ship by consortium standards built for long-range science trips, and its crew of 12 included people from 6 species, along with Kate and Alex and Danny, who were officially listed as human. Cultural liaisons in the cover story was simple because they were surveying the Calresh Nebula for archaeological evidence of pre-war civilizations, but the truth was much more complex. Danny warned that this could be dangerous because if the consortium hid this for 12,000 cycles, they would not be happy about them finding it. And Kate said she knew someone who might help and pulled up a contact file saying Professor Morrison gave her a name, which was Captain Helen Grant, who commanded the human diplomatic vessel Horizon, and she had been in space for 20 years longer than any other human, and if anyone knew more it was her. And Alex nodded, saying they should go talk to her. But Danny pointed out she was on the other side of the station in the restricted diplomatic sector, and Kate smiled, saying they were about to test how restricted it really was. And the diplomatic sector of the Consortium Academy station was built to impress, with tall buildings blending styles from 100 worlds, creating spaces that felt both alien and welcoming, and security was there, but quiet, with guards from various species trained to keep order without making it feel oppressive, and 3 human students walking through the main area drew attention but not alarm. And Kate had sent a message to Captain Grant's office asking for a meeting to discuss human cultural history, and to her surprise Grant agreed right away, and they found the human diplomatic rooms in a quieter part of the sector, and the door had Earth's flag on it, which filled Kate with unexpected emotion, because how long had that flag existed, and did it come before the Void War, or was it made after by survivors trying to rebuild their identity? And the door opened before they could knock, and a woman in her 50s stood there looking fit and alert, with gray-streaked hair pulled back, and Captain Helen Grant had the look of someone who spent decades in space, and her eyes had a sharpness that immediately put Kate on edge. And Grant said Kate Sullivan's name, and noted she brought friends and told them to come in quickly, and they entered rooms that were surprisingly simple, with human furniture and real books on shelves and photographs of Earth on walls, and Grant sealed the door and turned on a privacy field with its quiet hum filling the room, and she said Kate asked uncomfortable questions, and Professor Morrison sent her report, and half the consortium council wanted Kate expelled and sent back to Earth, while the other half wanted to study her like a dangerous specimen. And Kate asked what Grant wanted, and Grant smiled, but there was no humor in it, and said she wanted to show them something, and pulled up a holographic display that made Kate's tablet look like a toy, with images and data filling the air between them, all marked with security labels that made Kate's stomach drop. And Grant said 20 years ago she was a captain in Earth's new space navy, and they had just made their first crude faster-than-light drive put together from principles they did not fully understand, and it was like their ancestors left them a puzzle with pieces scattered through their collective mind, and they finally put it back together. And she moved the hologram forward, saying, the consortium made first contact 6 months later, and they were terrified, not hostile, but deeply afraid, and they gave humans a choice to join them peacefully and accept monitoring and restrictions, or be locked in their solar system permanently. And Alex asked why they were afraid, and Grant said because humans were not supposed to rediscover faster-than-light travel for another 1,000 cycles, and the mind profile said humanity needed more time to mature and grow past violent ways. But they did it anyway, because humans do not wait for permission. And Grant pulled up an image that made all three students gasp, because it was a ship that was massive and elegant with symbols that looked strangely familiar. And Grant said quietly, "This was the UNSS Defiance, which was found in deep space 3 years ago by a consortium survey team, and it was a human warship. From the Void War time, perfectly kept in the void, and the consortium classified it at the highest level. So only a handful of beings in the galaxy knew it existed." And Danny asked if she had been aboard, and Grant said once, with a full consortium. Security team watching every move, and the ship's computer was damaged but not destroyed. And they recovered pieces including crew logs and battle reports, and Kate. They found something that changed everything. And she pulled up a text file with words in English but ancient in a form older than any modern language on Earth. And it said, "Final log, Captain Andrew Kane, UNSS Defiance. And we are the last ship and the fleet is gone and Earth burns below us, and the enemy prepares their final attack, but we have one option left called Project Silence, and it was meant as a last resort and a weapon so terrible that its use was forbidden by human law. But there is no law anymore and there is only survival." And Grant paused, letting them read, and the log continued saying, "Project Silence will destroy the enemy, all of them, and every ship and station and world that joined this war. And it uses the enemy's own faster-than-light networks against them, turning their technology into a weapon that will spread across the galaxy. But it comes at a price because the weapon will destroy the faster-than-light ability of every species, including humans, and it will send everyone back to slower-than-light speeds, trapping species in their home systems and ending space travel for thousands of years." And Kate felt cold and said, "They built a weapon that would end the war by ending space travel itself." And Grant corrected her, saying, "Not just space travel, because the logs showed that Project Silence would also create electric pulses across affected worlds, destroying advanced electronics, and it would trigger a technology collapse across the entire galaxy." And Danny breathed out, saying, "The dark silence, and that humans caused it, and humanity ended the Void War by destroying everyone's technology." And Grant said, "Not just ending it, but winning it, because humans had something no other species did, which was that they survived apocalypses before, including ice ages and plagues and asteroid impacts, and their species evolved to endure terrible setbacks. So when Captain Kane activated Project Silence, he knew something the others did not. And Alex said that humans would survive, and Grant said humans would adapt, and closed the hologram saying every other species had become dependent on their technology, and when it was taken away, they could not function, and civilizations collapsed, and populations died, and knowledge was lost. But humans went back to caves and farms, and boats and horses, and they went backward. Yes, but they survived, and eventually they rebuilt." And Kate stood with her mind spinning and said, "So the Void War did not end in mutual destruction, but ended because humanity destroyed everyone's ability to wage war." And Grant added, "And then wiped their own memories of doing so, because the final part of Kane's log was a message to survivors saying he knew that knowledge of what humanity did would poison their future, and that they would be forever marked as the species that destroyed galactic civilization." So Project Silence had a second part, which was a mind virus distributed through the very electronic systems it destroyed, and it erased records and corrupted data, and made information about the war's end impossible to rebuild fully. Captain Grant had worked diplomatic miracles to arrange the trip, calling in favors, and making promises that Kate suspected would take years to fulfill, and the Consortium Council had reluctantly approved it, likely hoping the search would turn up nothing and put the matter to rest. And Commander Lisa Park, who was the Nova Light's captain, was a career consortium officer and a practical woman in her 40s who asked no unnecessary questions, and she knew they were looking for something specific but seemed content to let the search happen without interference. And the journey to the Calresh Nebula took 8 days at faster-than-light speeds, and Kate spent the time studying everything about the final battle, and the official records were thin. But she had started to recognize the gaps in the places where information had been deliberately erased or corrupted. And on the 7th day, Alex made a discovery and said he had been analyzing the nebula's composition and pulled up a holographic display in the ship's common area, and the other humans gathered around, and he said the official story was that these were planetary remains turned to dust by antimatter weapons, but the element ratios were wrong, and Danny leaned forward studying the data and asked what he meant. And Alex said planetary matter has distinctive signatures based on how the materials formed, But these readings showed heavy elements that should not exist in natural planetary cores because they were artificial and manufactured, and he highlighted several data points, and Kate breathed out, saying a shipyard, because they built a shipyard in the nebula, and Alex corrected her, saying, not just a shipyard, because this much material meant they were talking about a construction facility capable of building huge warships and maybe dozens of them, and the implications hung in the air, because if humans kept a hidden construction facility in the nebula during the war, it meant their industrial capacity was far greater than anyone suspected, and Danny added there was more, and pulled up his own research, saying he had been mapping debris fields based on the Nova Light's sensors, and most of the wreckage followed predictable orbital patterns around the nebula's center of mass, but there was one cluster that did not, and it was holding position, which meant it was either powered or anchored to something, and Kate said that was their target, and Commander Park must have been monitoring their conversation because her voice came over the intercom asking human liaisons to come to the bridge, and they found Park studying the same data they had been analyzing, and the Valorian navigator with his light patterns showing concern turned as they entered, and Park said without introduction that their hidden ship had been found, or rather it found them because they were being scanned by technology that should not exist, and on the main display buried in the heart of the nebula's thickest region was a structure that made Kate's breath catch because it was not a ship, but a space station that was massive and angular, with a design completely different from anything in the consortium, and Danny read from the scan data saying UNSS Fortress Deep, which was a military space station, and according to these readings, portions of it still had power, and Park turned to face them fully, saying, Captain Grant told her they might find something unexpected, but she did not mention it might still be operational. And if that station's weapon systems were active, this ship would not survive a single shot, and the Valorian navigator protested that it had been dead for 12,000 years, and nothing could remain functional that long, and Kate said quietly that human engineering could, because they built things to last since they knew they might not survive to repair them, and Park made a decision saying they would approach slowly with passive sensors only, and if that station showed any hostile intent, they retreat immediately. And they all nodded, and the Nova Light crept forward, threading through debris fields and radiation pockets, and the nebula's gases created a strange backdrop with swirling colors that seemed to shift and change. And Kate felt like they were descending into history itself, with each kilometer bringing them closer to truths that had been hidden for thousands of years. And the station came into clearer detail, and it was built in a star pattern, with 6 arms coming out from a central hub, and each arm likely served a different function, like shipyards and supply depots and command centers, and entire sections were destroyed and torn apart by weapons fire. But the core structure remained intact, and the communications officer reported picking up a signal saying it was weak, but definitely artificial, and broadcasting on old human frequencies, and Park asked if they could translate it, and the officer worked for a moment, then went pale and said it was a warning beacon that was automated and repeating, and it said Fortress Deep with all personnel deceased, and automated systems maintaining minimum functionality, and warning that Project Silence activation codes were stored in core computer, and unauthorized access will trigger station self-destruct. And Park repeated Project Silence, and looked at Kate, saying that was what they were really after, which was not just historical records but the weapon that ended the war. And Kate met the commander's look and said they needed to know how it worked and what it really did, because the official histories said the war ended in mutual destruction. But that was not true, and someone chose to end it, and they needed to understand why. And Park considered this for a long moment and said if they board that station, and it self-destructs, they will take the truth with them to the grave. And Kate said, then they will be very careful not to trigger the self-destruct. And Park smiled, slightly, saying Kate was as stubborn as the stories say humans are, and turned to her crew saying prepare a boarding team with full containment protocols, because they treat this as both a potential biohazard and archaeological site. And 2 hours later, Kate and Alex and Danny stood in the Nova Light's airlock wearing environmental suits designed to protect them from both radiation and potential contaminants. And Park had insisted on joining them, along with 2 security officers and a Valorian scientist named Kent, whose light patterns showed he was equally excited and terrified. And the station's docking port accepted their ship with surprising ease, as ancient mechanisms ground to life after 12,000 years of sleep. And when the airlock cycled and they entered Fortress Deep, Kate felt like she was stepping into a tomb, and emergency lighting activated as they moved through the corridors, dim and red, casting everything in shades of blood, and the walls had scars from combat with blast marks, and in one section what looked like claw marks from something large and alien. And Alex said, running his gloved hand near a melted wall, that they fought here inside the station itself. And Park said grimly it was a final stand, because when the enemy broke through the defenses, the crew would have fallen back to defend critical areas. And they found the first bodies in what had once been a command center, with humans still in their uniforms, preserved by the vacuum and cold. And one sat at a console with hands frozen on the controls as if she died while entering commands. And Kate looked away with her throat tight, because these people died defending Earth and defending humanity's future, and they had been forgotten for 12,000 cycles.